Hello, and thank you for choosing to watch this video. This is number 14 in the series of What If Fantasy Model Kit Box Art. The video is going to look at some model kits that I wish had been made back in the day when I was a kid growing up making lots of models. If you were watching TV in the 1970s, you would have been very aware of the $6 Million Man, a massively successful TV show starring Lee Majors. There were several model kits by Fun Dimensions: Steve fighting an alligator, Steve breaking down a door, and a couple of different things. A model kit that they didn't do, and I wish somebody would have, was the HL-10, which was the lifting body that is being test flown when Steve Austin has the accident, which results in him becoming the Bionic Man. So in this artwork, I've imagined it as if it was a Revell kit that had been made in the 60s when they were doing all the other X-Craft and spaceships and all that sort of cool NASA stuff from the 60s, and then kind of reboxed because of the $6 Million Man appearance. The ship that you see every week in the footage that you see in the titles of the crash features something called an M2F2, I think, which kind of looks like the HL-10, but is a different aircraft. But in a later episode in the series, Steve has to sort of fly the plane again and has to sort of face his past kind of thing. And in that they refer to it as the HL-10, and indeed there's quite a lot of shots of the real HL-10 with Lee Majors and stuff. So yeah, this would just be one of those probably very simple kits. As I said, maybe something that had they made it in the 60s would have been reboxed as a $6 Million Man. A little bit surprising no one did a kit, because as I said, the show was so successful, but maybe because this was sort of bit of a downer. This is the thing he's crashing. But anyway, it would have been a nice kit, and I just wanted to do some of this artwork that looked like that kind of 60s, jet plane artwork of that sort of Revell and Aurora boxes of the day. So again, if you were watching the $6 Million Man, you were almost certainly also watching Doctor Who, a British television show that started in 1963. And when I started watching it, it was Jon Pertwee, the third actor to play the Doctor, followed up by Tom Baker, which is when the show really achieved sort of massive popularity. And apart from the TARDIS, which is Doctor Who's time machine, and the Daleks, there wasn't really a lot of hardware in the show. There were a lot of monsters and things like that, but no real hardware. The Pertwee era, though, he was sort of banished to Earth, and he was working with UNIT, which I think was the United Nations Intelligence Task Force. So basically the army. So they were sort of there to help him, or he was their technical advisor, but basically he'd get involved in something, and then if they needed a bit of muscle, there'd be soldiers from UNIT and the Brigadier to kind of go in, back him up and help. But it was contemporary technology, mainly Land Rovers and sort of open back lorries. In the robot episode, which is the first Tom Baker story, there's this giant robot, and they need to sort of pull in some extra horsepower, so they bring in the tank. And this is one of the more infamous moments making Doctor Who's budget highly apparent, because the tank that they bring in isn't a real tank. They couldn't get hold of a real tank, and they just use a Action Man toy tank, which they don't do anything to. It's not like in the Anderson shows where they get a Tiger Joe tank and really add detail to it and paint it up and shoot it at high speed to make it look really big. This is just an Action Man tank being pushed along, and it's laughable. So in this artwork, I have painted a real Land Rover, because that's what they use, and the Brigadier, and I put Sergeant Benton next to him, and then the tank I've painted as the Action Man tank rather than a real Scorpion tank that it is based on. I think this would be a nice little, if it was in 32nd scale, a decent size, Airfix's size, not 35th. I tried to sort of capture the outdoor England feel in this picture. As it was set on Earth, and Jon Pertwee was quite action oriented. He was always up for any of that sort of physical action. So he had two land vehicles, the Whomobile and Bessie. Bessie was used mostly, and it was sort of meant to be this sort of, Edwardian era roadster or whatever. It was very popular, I think. It's not a real car, though. In sort of doing my research, I think it was sort of a kit car based on, I think, a Ford Cortina. which is why if you look at it, the spoked wheels are actually just sort of discs, and the areas in between the spokes are just sort of painted black to cover up the actual wheel hubs. But, it didn't matter. It was fun. Bessie was always good for him sort of going around and being able to get up close to sort of monsters and things. And the other one is the Whomobile, which is something John Pertwee himself had made. And this appears in maybe two, 3 stories. And it sort of drove along the ground and also flew through the wonders of chroma key or CSO. And it's a cool design. Always made me think of like a fairground bumper car, because it's even painted in that same sort of like, metallic silver paint job, and has indicator lights and, and various sort of things that a car actually needs. It looked like it sort of hovered. I think that was the intention, that it was sort of hovered along, and you get the Doctor and Joe Grant. That seemed like a good package deal. A show that I remember seeing very fleetingly was an Australian show called Phoenix 5. And I remember this being on sort of in the early 70s, and I think it was made in 1970 in Australia. And it was sort of like a Star Trek format. The Phoenix 5 sort of was going through space and solving problems and that sort of thing. I really recall very little about it. I don't think it was shown particularly regularly. But in researching it, I found out that it was actually the third in a trilogy that started with a miniseries called The Interpreters in 1966, and then Vega 4 in 1968, and then Phoenix 5 in 1970. I don't recall ever seeing the other shows, and I really don't recall Phoenix 5 even being shown very, very frequently. And it was low budget, and I don't remember there being any space action. No. I mean, there wasn't, in Star Trek, there wasn't a whole lot, but you saw the Enterprise and you knew what the Enterprise looked like. And Phoenix 5 was very skimpy on what you saw. The Phoenix 5 ship itself appeared in those other miniseries, so the model was sort of repurposed from there. I don't know if the visual effects shots of it were also reused. I did come across a still from one of those other miniseries where the pods on the end of the wings, if you can call them wings on a spaceship, sort of rotate so it can come into land vertically, which is pretty interesting. Again, I don't know if the Phoenix 5 could do that, so it's a little bit sketchy, but I thought this box art would be a good way to kind of show it. Forgotten or not very much seen in the first place, a show called Star Maidens. This was one of those few things that wasn't Doctor Who and wasn't a Jerry Anderson show. Basically, there was this planet called Medusa, I think, that's all sort of run by the female population, and the male population are all subservient, and two of the guys escape in a spaceship to Earth and are pursued by two of the police force, if you like, I think. From Medusa, and most of the action is sort of people, being sort of followed around on Earth, and there's not a lot of hardware. But you do see this ship, the Nemesis, this sort of teardrop-shaped flying saucer sort of looking thing. You see this sort of land on Earth, which really looks impressive. And when it's flying through space, it's pretty decent. It has this kind of like glowing section in the middle, which is, I guess, some sort of drive system or something. I don't remember a whole lot else about the show. It had kind of funky music, and some of the behind-the-scenes crew also worked on Space 1999. Quick bit of trivia, Gareth Thomas appears in the show, and he will play Blake in Blake 7. Captain Zepp, Space Detective. I doubt if many people, certainly outside of England, would even have heard of this, and probably very few people here remember it. This was a kids' TV show that featured mysteries, and then a studio audience of kids would try and solve the mystery that's being presented to them. And the Zepp 1 was Captain Zepp's spaceship. Kind of a cool design, and it looked really good. They actually did really good shots of it flying around through space, on motion control and blue screen, and, it looked way better than anything in Blake 7 or Doctor Who. But it was only a handful of shots that I think were all in the title sequence. Anytime you saw anything in the show, it was either, as I said, the studio audience or the adventure that they were following or being presented, a case, I think everything was called a case, being presented to them by Captain Zepp and his crew, was all done with kind of comic strip drawings for the aliens and the alien worlds and all this amazing stuff. And they were nice, they were really nice drawings. And I think, from time to time, Captain Zepp would be kind of blue screened in to be having a conversation with an alien. It's kind of It was kind of it was a fun little show. Again, a kid's show, but it had this cool spaceship in it, which I think I'm right in saying started its life as a model for a proposed Dan Dare TV series that never actually happened. It was designed by Martin Bower, made by Bill Pearson. It was also part of the Alien and all that good stuff back in those days. Before all these 70 shows, of course, there was Fireball XL5, The Intergalactic Adventures of Steve Zodiac, Venus, and Professor Matic and Robot in Fireball XL5, which was this huge ship. You see it in the opening titles with crew members kind of getting on board, and it's massive. It's 408 feet long. So a kit of it in 288 scale would come in at about 17 inches, which would be pretty nice. And then Fireball Junior, which is the nose cone section, can detach and then go and land on a planet. So that would be, 3 to 4 inches of that. Decent size. And in the kit, I think you'd get like optional landing gear, because Fireball Junior has landing gear for it to land, and sometimes they land the whole ship, and it has like landing gear in the front of it and in the tail. This was a show I had first heard about via this record called Children's TV Themes, which was a compilation album that had this on there, and it had Thunderbirds and Joe 90 and all the other Anderson stuff, and this was on there, and it was like, oh, I wonder what that is. And then I'd also got some TV 21 annuals, and they had Fireball XL5 in it, so there were a couple of pictures of the ship, and I was like, wow, what a cool ship. It's designed by Reg Hill. He also designed Stingray and Supercar. I mean, sort of one of the unsung heroes of the Anderson setup. Very talented. And Airfix were involved in a kit of Fireball XL5 that was done at the time, a promotional tie-in that if you bought enough ice lollies and sent in some money, you could get this kit back from them, and which was pretty decent by all accounts. It was never released by Airfix, and as I said, you could only get it through this special offer. Something else in Fireball XL5 was the jetmobile, and really just driven by Jerry Anderson's distaste of what the characters looked like when they walked. He felt that they didn't look credible when they walked, so anytime they could have them sitting down flying a plane or on these sort of jetmobile hoverbike type things was a good thing. Stingray, Thunderbirds, and even to a lesser extent Captain Scarlet all had some sort of vehicle that the characters could use to get around. And I think it's just one of those great pieces of world building where, born out of that sort of necessity or desire to not have them walk, you actually have this added, sort of level of technology and just thoughtfulness. They're still sort of accessible on these jetmobiles. The Fireball XL5 jetmobiles, I think in particular, really nail the credibility, if you like. I mean, they look like they're styled like a Lambretta or a Vespa moped. They've got that super sleek 60s look, and they look simple enough that you could just hop on it and go, and off you go. But credible as well. Great, beautiful. Had they done a kit of one of these, something like 12th scale, sort of been 6 inches long or so with Steve Zodiac on it, would have been a really nice little kit. And Airfix did a series of 12th scale historical figures, so it wouldn't have been out of the question. So Space Patrol is a show made by Roberta Lee and Arthur Provis, who had worked with Jerry Anderson on Torchy the Battery Boy and The Adventures of Twizzle. And then Roberta Lee created this other show called Space Patrol, very similar to Fireball XL5 in concept. It has really great characters, really great story. The action takes place all within the solar system. They sort of make a point of saying that it takes a long while to travel through space, so the crew has to go into suspended animation, which is kind of an interesting level of scientific thought that goes into it. But then they have talking birds from Mars and other sort of fancier stuff. So it's a fun show. It doesn't have the pizzazz of the Jerry Anderson show. It doesn't have the Barry Gray music. Doesn't have the Derek Meddings and spectacular action and stuff. But nice little show. And the Galasphere is pretty interesting. It has this sort of energy field around it when it's traveling. Who knows what that's doing? It's sci-fi, but it looks like it's doing something. And when it lands, the bottom folds out into landing gear. And they have hover bikes as well that they fly around on. When Larry Dart and his crew get somewhere, they end up getting on their sort of version of a hover bike. The show was made in black and white. I found a few bits of artwork from like comics and books to try and understand what color the Galasphere is. It seems to be anywhere between copper and sort of silver. I'm kind of going for the silver route. If that's not right, someone please tell me. So that does wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please like, subscribe, comment, check out the website, and hope you're all doing well, and see you soon. Thanks again for watching. Bye-bye.